It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the re-energized Robert Beckley. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Beckley. How you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great, Andy. Super re energized. You're right. And if we look at air conditioning, heating, water heating, lighting, TV and media equipment, in other words, all the things that make our lives comfortable, they're measured in units named after today's hero. I'm excited about
That's right. They measured in watts, correct?
that. What?
And
Yeah.
measured in watts and named after the great James Watt, 1736 to 1819. The
Wow.
the yeah, he lived to be 83 back then, which is a long life. He lived
Hmm.
some of his children died, at very early ages. But yeah, he lived to be 83. He's the preeminent inventor of the 18th century, although with apologies to Benjamin
Yes.
Franklin, who certainly has a claim. But the James Watt's perfection
Yes.
of the Thomas Newcomen steam engine, provided what they call the work engine of the Industrial Revolution. That was monumentally important.
Absolutely, Andy. And actually, what I'd like to do is set the context. Let's go back
Go
like
ahead.
300 years in time. And the main source of power for food, shelter, and clothing, it was manual labor. Yeah, there were some windmills and there were water wheels, but they were only in specific locations. And animal labor. So basically, there was no mass production. There was
Yeah, you
nothing
had muscle,
near the convenience of
muscle power, muscles, Miss
right.
Taggart. That's all it takes to make
Ben
anything in the
Neely,
world.
you're
Right.
right.
So yeah, you had the muscles of human beings, you had the muscles of horses and oxen, and in some cases, the rushing water of streams, if you were near streams, and
Yeah,
that's it. That's it.
that's it. And that's why life expectancy was 20, 30. Some people made it to 35, 40 years old, but it was a brutally hard life. We don't have that today. We do, and we should be grateful. You and I clearly are grateful, Andy, but this is one reason we celebrate these kinds of heroes because they have made our lives so much more convenient. And so, yeah, Watt's born 1736
Mhm.
in Scotland.
Yep.
We'll get to the Scottish Enlightenment and harken back to the episode you did with John on the Lunar Society and how these thinkers all impacted the culture. But his father worked in mechanics. He was sickly as a child, and so his mother taught him. He was largely self taught in his early years, and um, not really good with. Um, Really good with numbers, but not good with like literature and what we'll call humanities. But was always tinkering with things, and this was the start of his future, being mechanically inclined.
Right. Right. And they say his mother came from a fairly prominent family. She was well educated, which was
Yeah,
unusual back then, but and had a strong personality, and she certainly did a good job educating her son. Mind me when I was doing some research on James Watt, and I did a lot of reading on James Watt years ago to
yes.
when I was writing you know the Capitalist Manifesto. But
Hmm.
and we'll certainly I
Talk about
always
that.
looked at
Yep.
how to get this
Hmm.
lined up with the camera. But we'll certainly get some references from Catman, as I like to think of it. But it reminded me a little bit of the story of the greatest inventor of the 19th century, Thomas Edison, and probably the greatest
Hmm.
inventor of all time. Edison, probably the goat, in the field of inventing. But Edison got kicked out of school by the headmaster when he was like, I forget, third grade,
Yeah.
fourth grade, something like that. The headmaster told Mrs. Edison that the kid's brain was addled. You know, confused. Yeah, well, he did okay. Somebody
Hmm.
with an addled brain, And so
Yeah.
Mrs. Edison was absolutely convinced her son was special, and
Right.
she took the kid home and she educated him at home, and went as far as she
Hmm.
could. And after that, he became an
Hmm.
autodidact. So there's a lot to be said about getting education from your mother, at home, or your father, as the
Yeah.
case may be. But yeah, it's interesting. There's a certain parallel there between these two great inventors being educated at home by their moms.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was one, Dylan, if we could show the image of him with the tea kettle. There's one possibly apocryphal story of his aunt telling him, James Watt, I've never seen such an idle boy. Take a book in your hands and use it. And he says, for the last hour, you haven't spoken a word. But you've taken the lid off the kettle and put it on again, and you're holding a cup with a silver spoon, and you know you should be ashamed of yourself for spending your time this way. She's basically busting his chops while he, as you can see in this illustration, he's studying. He's fascinated with steam. And Andy, let's just for 1 second, let's just talk about if we go back 300 years. There are two power sources. We mentioned Benjamin Franklin had tamed electricity. He put it for the use for man. Steam is scary. Okay, it's
Mhm.
hot. It's it's freaking scary. I don't know much
Got
about it
it's got
myself.
a lot of power. It's got a lot of power, a lot of
It's
latent
got a
power.
lot of power, and Watt is studying it, and he's fascinated with it. And inventors and people who want to tame nature and put it for human use, they're in a special category. They are in a special category, and that's one reason that I consider Watt to be such a giant. So yeah, he's self-educated at
Yeah,
home,
and
with
remember,
his
just let me
mother.
interject for a second. Back then,
Yeah.
steam boil, human mastery of steam power was at its very early stages, and steam boilers would explode. And
Yes.
you're right, they
Yeah.
were dangerous. You could get killed. You could get killed that
Yeah.
way. So
Yeah.
Watt certainly took enormous steps forward in mastering the power of steam. No doubt about that.
Hmm. Yeah, so he's working in his father's shop. He's working with like cranes and pulleys and pumps, and the men around him see this boy, and they say, James has fortune at his finger ends. Like they know he's going to do something in life. And unfortunately, when he's 18, his mother passes away, and his father's ill, and he goes to Glasgow. Oh, the town they lived in, it's small town. What is it? Greenock,
I don't remember. It's a
in
small
Scotland, but
town
it's
in
like an
Scotland.
hour today. Yeah, today is like an hour northwest of Glasgow, which
Glasgow.
is in
By the way,
Scotland. Yeah.
Rob, we should point out here that according to a number of historians, Scotland was the poorest country in Europe back then, and
Yeah.
that's saying a lot because
Yeah.
prior to the Industrial
Yes.
Revolution, living standards were abysmally poor.
Yeah.
The French historian Fernand Braudel, one of the leading historians writing in the 20th century, talked about famine just being common.
Mm.
Of course, your people dying
Hmm.
of starvation. Carlo Cipolla, the Italian historian, wrote a book, was it Before the Industrial Revolution? He said before the Industrial Revolution, he had a quote in there that it was not uncommon to find people dead by the side of the road with their teeth in the dirt and the grass, trying to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you imagine? This was
Yeah.
so Scotland was even poorer than according to Arthur Herman and How the Scots Invented the Modern World, which is a great book, by the way.
Great book.
Yeah,
Highly recommend
yeah,
that. Hmm.
yeah, and other historians, Scotland was dirt poor, and so what came out of his family wasn't poor, but most of the Scots were, and shortly before his lifetime, he's born actually like 40 years, two generations before his lifetime, 1690s, there was this massive famine. And they
Yeah.
called it the lean
Hmm.
years in Scotland, where thousands of Scots
Mm.
starved to death. The population was under 2 million, so you have thousands or tens of thousands of people starving to death. That's a significant portion of the population. And in
Hmm.
Finland, it was even worse. It was something like during the 1690s, it was something like a one
Wow.
quarter to one third of the entire Finnish population starved to death. That was during
Mm.
the Little Ice Age when the temperatures, the
Yeah.
climate was colder then. And what you were talking about, the primitive technology of the day, there was no way to grow crops. The cold simply
Yeah.
killed off the
Hmm.
plant life and the vegetation, and they had just didn't have the knowledge in agricultural science or in agricultural technology to protect the crops, and thousands of people across northern Europe starved to death. So this was not that long before Watt was born. In
Hmm.
Scotland, very poor country, and the Scots were, to their everlasting credit, many of the Scots, certainly the leading thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment. We're going to discuss Watts one, Joseph Black, Adam Smith.
Yes.
Who were all
Yeah.
friends of Watt. They were highly motivated to
Yeah.
make advances that would create greater wealth and raise Scotland out of this famine level poverty. So uh,
Hmm.
yeah, the poverty here for people who want to live on Earth, poverty can often be a spur to try to make advances that'll increase the wealth and raise the levels of prosperity and increase living standards and life expectancies. And certainly Watt was highly motivated and wanted to make money. He wanted to be a
Yeah.
commercial success.
Yeah. Staying with Scotland and the theme, Andy, one book that I got, which I recommend, written about Watt, is by another Scotsman who came to America making like $1 a day.
Oh
That's
yeah,
Andrew Carnegie. He
right.
wrote a really good biography of James Watt, and at first he turned down the offer. This was already, he had retired like 1905, 1904, I think, and
Yeah, he sold
then he
Carnegie
studied
Steel
this.
to a sold. We
He had
discussed
already,
J.P.
yeah,
Morgan, right? Yeah, he
that's
sold
right.
Carnegie
That's right.
Steel
Yeah.
to a conglomerate headed by
So he had the
J.P. Morgan.
money. He had the
Oh
money to
yeah,
do
he
a
was the
life
wealth. What
labor.
didn't Morgan ask him after they? I don't know if they even signed the
Yeah.
contract. Did they have a gentleman's agreement?
No, a
You know,
handshake. Yeah, it was a
handshake,
handshake.
handshake,
And
gentleman's
we'll get the
agreement. How's it?
handshakes here. Mhm.
Yeah, how does it feel to be the wealthiest man in the world? I think Morgan asked Carnegie. At that
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'll quote the contract that actually that Watt has later on in life. But he's 18. He moves to Glasgow, and you had mentioned one of his instructors, Joseph Black, was a
Mhm.
big influence in Watt's life. He wants to become an instrument maker because he's just fascinated. Basically, when they look at him at this point, they just think he's not a jack of all trades. He can fix anything. He's the kind of guy that can fix anything. Maybe he can't build from scratch yet. He's still too young for that, but he can fix anything. And so that's what he starts doing in Glasgow. And then he actually goes to London because there's better work there. There's better equipment and things of that nature. He's studying. He's reading up on chemistry, and then he comes back to Glasgow, and that's when he opens up his own shop. This is around like 1759, so he's in his
Early
like
20s.
early
Yeah,
20s, yeah, 23, 24. And he again, now it's like the steam engine is grabbing him. He's studying up on the steam engine, and he's working um, in a shop, I think, at the university, and they bring him this Newcomen engine, and he's fixing it. And while he's fixing it, he sees the flaws in it. That
yeah,
basically more than 75% of the energy is being wasted. It's being lost in this engine, which is the best technology of the day,
yeah,
which is helping save a lot. It's the output is like 200 times what horses are that the Newcomen steam
right.
engine is. And once Watt sees this, he gets this idea of how can I improve this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the Thomas
Hmm.
Newcomen steam engine, early 18th century, was a
1712.
major.
Hmm.
Yeah, sounds right. 1712
Yeah.
was a major advance, and was being largely used to pump water out of mines. At that time, and
Yeah.
had real practical value. Watt, that we should emphasize, is, like you said, he's at the University of Glasgow. He's a workman. Joseph Black, Professor Joseph Black, recognized Watt's genius, that he was not just a workman. Black,
Yeah.
we should discuss briefly. Black was one of the leading scientists of the day. He was was a leading
Hmm.
chemist and physicist. He had isolated several gases and described the properties of them. He was an outstanding scientist and and
Hmm.
very advanced. And he was the one. Wasn't it Black who discovered the principle of latent heat? And had
Yes.
this. And
Yeah. Actually, that was a bit which definitely helped Watt in his discoveries. That was a big point. Latent
yeah,
heat. Hmm.
was a big advance, and he studied its properties in
Yeah.
steam. And Watt
Hmm.
and Black collaborated, a lot in their work. And then, like you were saying, he worked on that Thomas Newcomen steam engine, figured out how to improve it. And what was he? One day he was taking a walk in the park, and he had a flash of insight about how to improve the steam engine.
Yeah.
What was it? The principle
Yeah.
of, I forget, was separate condensation. Is that what they called it?
Separate condensation, which he would eventually invent yeah, what is it, condenser, which would
Condenser.
take the water. Yeah, it would take the water and separate the hot from the cold, and then eventually he patented. That was actually his first patent. If we go on 1765 or so, so he's now
Yeah.
thinking as an inventor. And but let's just pause for a second here, Andy, on
I just want to say
patents.
the technology goes over
Yes.
my head. I don't know how it works, but
Okay, me too.
yeah.
Me too. I just, yeah, yeah. But I studied actually a little bit of electronics, and I got to say personally, Ohm's law. When I went to a trade school, Technical Career Institutes, we learned Ohm's law, which is resistance times current equals voltage, and then the derivative of that is voltage times current is power, and power is measured in watts. So I always felt like, wow, this is pretty cool. Actually, I got to tell you, when I was a kid, I looked at a light bulb and I was like, oh, what's this 75 watts, And I had no clue. It used to say it doesn't say it that loudly on the front of the light bulb. And I remember going to Andy and Britannica, encyclopedia, and I look up Watt and I find the story of what this man did. And so literally, since I'm like 10 years ago, oh, this guy's been a hero of mine. So that's one reason I'm so excited about the show.
No,
And
it's
then I go
interesting.
to electronics school and I'm studying that, power equals a watt and, amplifiers and all these things that bring me so much joy, in life. So yeah, that's the personal connection there. Go ahead. You were
No,
going to say something.
that's great. Yeah, yeah. Just you mentioned the Encyclopedia Britannica, which but prior to the internet, was the best compendium
That's right.
of knowledge, and
You're right.
still
Yeah.
it's still a great source. Uh, John
Yeah.
Robeson, another one of the professors at the University of Glasgow, colleague of Joseph Black
Hmm.
and mentor to James Watt. John Robeson was one of the leading contributors to the first Encyclopedia Britannica. So there's a nice
Hmm.
connection for you,
Hmm.
using
Yeah.
the encyclopedia, because we know in the 18th century Enlightenment was just a fount of knowledge and advances, and we know
Yeah.
Louis Diderot
Yeah.
in France had put
That's right.
almost superhuman efforts into creating the first encyclopedia, and he and some of his associates got in trouble with the king and the church for for
Yeah.
some of their
That's right.
entries, but
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
Brits shortly after developed the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? The encyclopedia of
Hmm.
the British, and is probably even better. It's probably even better than the French, although Diderot gets great
Yeah.
credit for pioneering this.
Yes.
But anyways, just wanted to get in that route. You mentioned the Encyclopedia Britannica, so it's an interesting tie-in here that Robeson,
You're right.
one of Watt's
All
buddies,
all out of the
yeah,
Enlightenment,
yeah,
or
exactly,
exactly, and
exactly.
all of it's coming out of the Enlightenment era. And but one somewhat negative, which was fixed sometime later, was patent law. Back then was not what it is now. If you wanted to take out a patent, it was almost like it was so difficult. You were kind of accused of trying to be a monopolist on something, and so inventors were not looked as these great figures, kind of the way they are and had become over the following centuries. And it was really costly. It was costly to get the patent, and then all of the mechanisms were expensive as well. So while Watt is building this, working on this his own steam engine, he gets a partner. This guy Roebuck, can't remember his
Yeah,
first name, but he's indebted.
Sears was Sears, right?
Yeah, I
Sears
know.
and Roebuck.
I think of that George Carlin joke. He goes, "You ever walk around Sears and wonder what happened to Roebuck?" I don't think anyone would get that joke anymore these days. But no, it wasn't the Roebuck of Sears.
Yeah, well,
It
we
was
can explain it though. Sears and Roebuck back in the day was a huge,
gigantic
department
department
store,
store. Yeah,
big mail
yeah,
order stuff. They were
that's
100
right.
years ago. They were huge.
A thick
But yeah, man,
catalog of.
that thick Sears Roebuck catalog. Yeah, Sears is still around, but it's
By
it's
himself.
it's
Yeah.
not what it used to be. It's
hmm
not what it used to be by himself. The department store is not what it used to be. But anyhow, so Roebuck, yeah,
So
was
they're
his
putting
first.
lots of money. They're putting lots of money into trying to create uh, this steam engine, and Roebuck is not. He runs out of money. He's bankrupted. He's pretty much bankrupted by 17 in the 1770s, and this is when uh, the partner Matthew Bolton comes into the picture. It's a pivotal moment in
Mhm.
Watt's life because all they were exactly the kind of team you need to be a success. As you said earlier, Watt wanted to make money, but he wasn't extravagant. He wanted was enough to tinker. Like he did not want to be massively wealthy, and he only wanted, and he didn't care about business. So he left all of that to Bolton. Um, and Bolton had his own. He was like one of the leading factory owners in Soho, Birmingham. So now we're going south
Yeah,
to where the Lunar Society is,
right.
and Birmingham has the top mechanics. So the match for Watt is, well, all these things I'm tinkering with that I want to do better. I can't do every single part of the project here. So the mechanics are getting involved, and the two Bolton sees the possibility of this team. So they draw up a contract between the two of them, and that's one of the things that Carnegie covers. And I just quickly, and just wanted to say one or two of these things. Bolton is getting 2/3. Watts says, "You know what? Just give me 1/3, but you take care of everything. I will just invent and do the mechanical side. I don't want to deal with the business. I don't want to deal with marketing and all
Right,
these other things. No."
right.
And we're told these days, here's where the businessman is so important and so underrated in these kinds of partnerships, because you know anything that is mass produced, if you don't have the business plan, the business model in place, which takes a different kind of mindset than the inventor, it won't get off the ground. And that's what happened with Roebuck. Basically, he didn't have the resources that Bolton did. And so they made this 25-year agreement, 1775 to 1800, that Watt would get this, Bolton would get that. It would go down to their sons if anything happened to either of them. And
Which
this
it
long
eventually did. Both of their sons took over the company eventually.
took over, and they one of the benevolent things, Andy, is they all got along well.
Yeah,
The fathers got along well, the sons got along well, so it was a perfect kind of partnership. And Bolton was this energetic go-getter. Watt was more quiet and introspective. So even the dynamic element between the two
right,
is fascinating.
right.
And I know when why don't you share the quote,
Yeah,
the famous
yeah. I have some
quote?
good stuff, some good
Yeah.
stuff here from
hmm
from the Capitalist Manifesto. But let me say a few things because you're right, Robert. Uh, Matthew Bolton ran the Soho Engineering Works in Birmingham,
Yes.
England, and was an outstanding entrepreneur and was very versed in the technology. As so that's and he had the craftsmen and the mechanics to really to greatly improve the actual functioning of Watt's steam engine. And so, this is an enormous moment in the history of the Industrial Revolution. The
Yes.
collaboration,
Hmm.
and the establishment of this company, Bolton and Watt,
Yeah.
as it was known, to perfect and mass produce the steam engine. And before I get to the quote that you talked about, we should mention Iron Mad John Wilkinson. you,
Go
you
ahead.
know, yeah, because I love his nickname. John
Yeah.
Wilkinson got the nickname Iron Mad, M-A-D. He was mad about iron because he thought everything should be made of iron, even coffins. He kept an iron coffin in his office, and and he's so he
Hmm.
was at his foundry. Wilkinson had perfected the means to bore cannons, which then he was able
Mm.
to apply to the Watt and Bolton steam engines. And then
Yeah.
then the steam engine was developed to the point where it became what was known as the work engine of the Industrial Revolution. And
Yes.
1785 is often dated as the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. History is not an exact science. It's not like math.
Right. Yeah.
Math, three times
Hmm.
three equals nine, and if you get a different answer, you're wrong. History is not quite doesn't admit to that the level of exactitude. But 1785 is as good a date as any to point to as the start of the Industrial Revolution, because that was the year that the powerful Watt and Bolton steam engines were first applied to driving the mules, in the
Yes.
British textile factories.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Hmm.
the quote you're talking about, when James Boswell, who's famous to all literary types as he was also Scottish, but he was the biographer
Hmm.
of Samuel Johnson, wrote that famous Life of Johnson. Boswell came to
Hmm.
Soho Engineering Works to interview Bolton, and Bolton said, "I sell here." He told him, "I sell here, sir, what all the world desires to have: power." So what a great quote.
Yes.
Now, when
Hmm.
we reflect that there's power to do good and there's power to do evil,
Yeah.
the Watt and
Hmm.
Bolton steam engine had enormous power to do good, starting in the textile industry. It was mass
Hmm.
produced huge amounts of cotton clothing, and then branched out into other industries as well. But we should say something about textiles, Robert, because
Yeah. Hmm.
prior to the factory system and being and the mules being driven, or the power looms being driven by the powerful Watt Bolton steam engines, clothes had to be made by hand, which is very labor
Hmm.
intensive.
Yep.
The factories churn out many units, whereas a handloom weaver can only do a few. So he's got to be paid for all the labor he put into it. It's very expensive. Uh, and remember, washing, no washing machines yet. You're scrubbing clothes on a scrubbing
Mm.
board or something,
Hmm.
contributes to wear and tear on the clothes. The poor couldn't afford for that. The overwhelming bulk
Yeah.
of the European population, or anywhere in the world, was desperately poor, like one half step ahead of starvation poor. And so they had one
Yes.
suit of clothes, and they couldn't
Which they
wash it.
wore till it wore out. Right.
Exactly.
They just wore it
Right.
until they were literally threadbare. Hmm.
Exactly, and you couldn't wash it for the reasons we just gave. So these clothes were just filled with vermin and all kinds of lice, and that spread diseases and stuff. So
Mm.
the Watt and Bolton steam engines and driving the mules in the factory system, churning out huge amounts of clothes, brings the price way down. And for the first time,
Yep.
maybe ever, the poor can afford multiple sets of clothes, and they could afford to
Yes.
wash them, because the
Yes.
clothes could be replaced much less expensively, which contributed to much more hygienic living and and much
Hmm.
lesser risk of disease. That's important. That's life giving. And
Yes.
the power to do good. I sell here, sir, what all the world desires to have: power. That should be the exultant motto of industrial capitalism, because this
Yeah.
is the power to
Yeah.
do
And
good.
just staying on that word, Andy, Ayn Rand makes a sharp distinction between political power, which is the power of force, and economic power, which is what Bolton and Watt and Boswell are all talking about here. Economic power and this driving engine of is coming from the productive capacity. So one of the terms that that Watt created was horsepower, because energy was exerted by horses going manually in circles to fulfill these tasks, and with their strength. And he's like, well, guess what, my steam engine can do more than 200 times those horses going at their full capacity. And it's a great visual. If you think of the term, which is now used in cars and all, right up to this day, when you say horsepower, it means something. Like, it means it's strong, right? It symbolizes some type of strength. And one difference I also want to say between the Newcomen engine, that was limited to being right near the water. So it was very limited. Bolton and Watts could be used anywhere. It was not limited geographically. Their steam engine could be used anywhere, and that was another reason for the explosive growth. First in the UK, but this caught on and spread rapidly across Europe, and then made its way over to the US. Now, there's one thing they battled, Andy. They battled, and again, kudos to businessmen who succeed, but there were a lot of people coming in trying to not take the, patents, and they spent a lot
Yeah.
of time and effort in court, in and out of court, trying to maintain the profits of their inventions and discoveries. And, um,
Yeah.
there are bad guys out there, and they will cut
Yeah, there's
corners, and they will do
there's
things.
right. There's often all kinds of legal battles over patent infringements. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes people have a legitimate case. Sometimes they're dishonest, like you said. And that's what we
Hmm.
need a court system for. We need a civil court system
Right.
to adjudicate these kinds of disputes. So yeah, I know Bolton and Watt spent a lot of time in court, adjudicating various
Hmm.
patent infringement cases. They won, I
Yeah.
think, but they still didn't get the full amount of money that they should have
No, and
received.
and again, if as you say in Capitalist Manifesto, and you've said many times before, imagine if that mental effort was put to productive use instead of fighting to maintain something that they actually created and maintain the
Yeah,
rights to what they created. Another thing they ran against, because this was such an incredibly revolutionary discovery, windmills and water mills. So the millers, especially like corn and bread, they weren't happy with this, because they were doing, they were being put out of business. So they went in and they sued. They got their labor, whatever. They had political pull to change things. So initially, Bolton and Watt, they made corn. No, they made flour instead, and then proved out the model. And then eventually, everybody came to them. So the battles that come with the growth, with the discovery, the innovator and the right hand man, the businessman who sees that idea and can put it to use. We covered this, Andy, like in the Fountainhead, with a Ken Lansing type person.
right.
Ayn Rand's money making personality is all about this thing, that there are two types of people. The inventor by himself is not alone. He needs somebody else to get that idea out there, to mass produce it, and that's when the benefits
Yeah,
can
and
really be seen.
Bolton was a brilliant entrepreneur. You're right.
Yes.
And Watt wasn't
Yeah.
interested in it. He was the inventor. Bolton was the entrepreneur, businessman, but also an expert technologist in his own right. And we'll discuss the Lunar
Yeah.
Society of Birmingham in just a few minutes. But we should
Yeah.
point out here, really, really emphasize something that we've already mentioned, and that is, this is the birth of the machine age.
Yeah.
Now we're not just making stuff, cotton clothing to start with, and then other products, with human muscle power, with animal muscle power, with this
Hmm.
water onrushing, water and of streams. Now we have machine power, which of course is embodied mind power. It's embodied
Hmm.
brain power. It enormously increases the human capacity to produce consumer goods, and thereby,
Yeah.
when starting with clothing, but then branching out to other, um, to manufacturing other products, and when basic law of economics, and one of Watt's buddies was Adam Smith, you know, moral
Yes, that's
professor,
right.
moral, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Smith was a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, and he and Watt were friends. But
Hmm.
Smith, of course, revolutionized our understanding of economics with his
Yes.
monumental Wealth of Nations. in 1776. But the basic law of economics is supply and demand. If you could
Hmm.
enormously increase the supply of X relative to demand for it, you're going to bring the price down, which is good for anybody, especially when people were so poor back then. So the mass
Hmm.
production of consumer goods is, using machine power is an enormously important step forward in the human ability to create the kinds of values, the kinds of consumer goods that we need to sustain our lives. This is the start of it, and then we notice in the 19th century, Edison goes a long way towards harnessing the power of electricity. You start with
Hmm.
steam power, you step forward to electric power. You invent the internal combustion engine. Whether it's
Yeah.
automobiles or you have diesel locomotives, and eventually we learned how to harness nuclear power. Although that's environmentalists don't want to use nuclear, but nuclear is tremendous capacity to generate.
Yeah.
Let's say electricity,
Energy.
and
Hmm.
yeah, to generate energy. I
Hmm.
just want to put in one plug. If you remember Peter Beckman, who
Oh yeah, health
was
hazards of not going nuclear. Book.
yeah,
I have it in
that's
my shelf. And access to
exactly
energy. Well, I used to
right.
subscribe.
Yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
exactly. Peter
Hmm.
Beckman, who I think came from Czechoslovakia when it was a communist country,
Yeah.
defected to the United States, was a
Yeah.
professor of electrical engineering, I think, at the University of Colorado in Boulder, was a
Colorado.
world
Yeah.
class expert. Yeah, was a world class expert on large scale energy conversion. Anybody out there, you get all the anti nuclear propaganda from the Greens. Uh, you could read 2,000 anti nuclear books if you want. Read them all. You only need to read one book that supports nuclear
Yeah.
power, and that's the one you mentioned, Robert. Peter
Yeah.
Beckman's book is brilliant. The health hazards
Yeah.
of not going nuclear, because what Beckman does is he doesn't argue that nuclear power is safe. He points out that any form of large scale energy
Everything is
conversion
dangerous. Yeah. It's
is
a matter
inherently
of what's
dangerous.
the cost
Yeah,
cost benefit. Hmm.
yeah, it's inherently dangerous. What he does, he expands the context. And what he does do is he shows nuclear power is far safer than any other
Yes.
form of large scale
Yes.
energy conversion. Brilliant book.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we see the advances of the human mind in generating, in the ability to use machine power to generate energy.
Hmm.
And this, to a significant degree, begins with what? With Bolton and Watt, with the Watt
Hmm.
Bolton steam engine. So huge step. I don't think we can overemphasize what a huge step forward this is in the ability to promote human life on Earth.
And bring people together because we have the transcontinental railroads, coming
Mhm.
into the next century, as you were saying, in even in the UK. So means of transportation, transporting goods, transporting people to places. Most people stayed. If we look at if we make like a chart, Andy, of human life before the Industrial Revolution, it is like bare subsistence. You lived in this pretty much the same place your whole life, wore the same clothes, and then you get this spike, end of the 1700s, early, early Industrial Revolution. This spike for um, above subsistence, and then to this rise of the middle class, which we've talked about as well, that people can now afford things that they could not, prior generations could not. Life expectancy, cleanliness, or health, and then the enjoyment of life, and where you even get luxuries, and you have extra time. You don't spend your entire life working. I mean,
Right.
that's what life was before the Industrial Revolution. Andy, to me, the two greatest revolutions, uh, Industrial Revolution, as we're talking about, and American Revolution, both born out of the Enlightenment. And just going back to your point, which was the age of reason, the human mind put to its full use, where you have this freedom. TOSI's motto, freedom and flourishing, were the two things that came, that we promote all
Mhm.
the time, that come out of both of those revolutions, industrial and American
Absolutely.
Revolution.
And to your point, Wrigley and Schofield wrote the definitive, well, certainly the leading demographic history. In the Capitalist Manifesto, I quoted Wrigley and Schofield, who are the leading demographic historians of Great Britain. I
Hmm.
forget the title of the book offhand, but Wrigley and Schofield, are well known. And they said, on the on the eve of the Industrial Revolution in 1760. Watt's 24
Mm.
years old, and the life expectancy in Great Britain did not reach 35 years old. I mean, and this is Great Britain,
Wow.
the land of
Yeah.
Locke, Newton, and the Glorious Revolution, and one of the
Magna
most
Carta.
advanced, yeah, the most
Mhm.
advanced countries in the world, certainly the freest country in Europe. And life expectancy
Yes.
was under 35. And you're right. There was a continuous progression after and because of the Industrial Revolution and the massive advances in the ability to produce consumer goods, and which eventually, importantly, included food. Life
Mhm.
expectancy is a steady rise upward through the 19th century into the 20th century, and to this day continuing. I think for a girl born today in a Western country, her life expectancy is around 80 years, not 34 as it was back then.
Wow.
Well, back then the female life expectancy was lower than the male life expectancy because so many otherwise healthy women
Died.
died in childbirth, including James Watt's first wife.
His
His
first wife.
first
Yeah,
wife
unfortunately. Yep. Hmm.
died young in childbirth. But let me tell you a story.
Before.
This just
Go ahead.
blows
Yeah.
my mind. So
Mhm.
I'm in class. It was a year or two ago, and the students, several of the students, have been bemoaning how complicated life is in our day in the 21st century, and they're saying, "God, life was so much simpler back, several hundred years ago." I had to like pick my jaw up off the floor,
Mhm.
because they don't know what they're talking about. They don't, and so I
Yeah.
pointed out. So how far back are we talking? You want to go back to the early days of the country, like 1800? Well, just off the top of my head, you have a toothache. What are we going to do? Well, there's no dentistry.
Ooh.
Today you can go to a dentist, and if necessary, you can have root canal. Or if you want to extract the tooth, there's
Mhm.
all kinds of humane ways to do it. Then what did they do? They give you a bottle of booze, you suck it down, they hold you down, put a big pliers or something, yank that thing out. And it's just agonizing. Medicine,
Yeah.
you're sick. What they do? They bleed you. Did they bleed George Washington when
Leeches.
he was sick? Yeah,
Yep. Leeches.
and
Mhm.
yeah, which of
Ugh.
course weakens you and makes you more susceptible to disease. You
Yeah.
want to travel? Well, there's no roads. There's certainly no cars. So you go on horseback or in a horse and buggy, maybe, because if it rains, there's the horse's hooves and the wheels will just sink into the mud. But you're
Mhm.
completely open. Imagine going on, trying to get from, I'm in the New York area, trying to get from the New York suburbs up to Albany or something. you know, well, you would go by boat back then. But if you had to go on land, and it's January, and you're on a horse, or an open, horse and horsey
Yeah.
buggy. Whereas today, obviously, we have automobiles that are enclosed, have heat in the winter, AC in the summer. You know,
Mhm.
so there's a cold winter, the crops fail. They don't have the agricultural science or technology to protect the crops. The people, not so much in the United States. There hasn't been much famine in the United States, but in Europe and around the world to this day, back then we discussed some of these
Periodic,
famines. Yeah,
periodic famines reduced,
endless,
reduced the human
endless.
population.
Yeah,
Yes,
endless back then.
regularly. Hmm.
Brodel's a leading historian. He talks about famines as it was just so common, that people just died of malnutrition as a matter of course. It's just happened all the time, all across Europe and the rest of it. So finally, the student,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, fine, I don't want to go back. I don't want no electricity, no electric light. So you live by candlelight for heat. When you're gonna go out and chop firewood, have a
Hmm.
fireplace, which doesn't heat the home as well as say the modern forms, but also so much smoke doesn't all go up the chimney. A lot of
Yeah.
smoke in the house. You breathe. Yeah, yeah. No,
Hmm.
you got to be nuts.
Yeah.
Yo,
I
Robert, our
agree.
good friend, our good friend Eric Daniels, professor of American history,
Yes.
it was talking about this show. I think it was on TV where people would volunteer to live like they had to live in colonial times, and
Yeah.
live with
Yeah.
all of these hardships, and for
Yeah.
me or you or all my students who are complaining about the complexity and difficulty of life in the 21st century, one day, maybe 2 days, and that's it. That's
Yeah.
That's enough. You're living in a
Yeah.
log cabin, the chinks in the walls, the wind is blowing in February. You're sitting there at home freezing. No, nobody wants to.
Yeah.
Nobody in their right mind would want to go, go back. What are you gonna do for
No, you're
food?
right, Andy. There was one of these reality shows. You're right, with Tim Ferriss and I think Rob Wolf, my paleo guru, and he said they were out in the wild for a few days, and he said all you think of is food. Where are you
Yeah,
going to get your food? You
yeah,
have to catch your
exactly.
food to eat it. You're not sure if the berries are wild, if the mushrooms are going to, kill you, and there's just so much uncertainty there. So again,
Yeah,
just coming back to
and if you're
the
trying to
benefits
grow
of what
crops,
these.
yeah, if you're trying to grow crops in 1800, you know, you get a
Mhm.
cold winter, you're sunk. You can't protect the crops
Yeah,
from from the cold. They die.
yeah,
It's yeah.
yeah.
Where are you going to
Amazing.
get food? Yeah. Where are you going to get
So
food?
talking
That's the
about food,
biggest
Andy,
problem.
one day I'm going to visit Carrie Ann. She's teaching in New York City. I'm walking along Houston Street. Dylan, if you could bring up the tavern. I'm walking there and I passed this sign. It says Bolton and Watt, and I'm like, they weren't open. It was like early in the morning, and I'm like, are these guys actually celebrating my heroes? So I go. I spend the afternoon with Carrie in her school, and then on the way back, I go into the place and it's empty. There's like it's a long bar with some tables for food, and then I take some pictures, which is they're on the currency. You can see it Bolton and Watt on the British 50-pound note, and then there's a little bust of James Watt. And I told these guys, I was like, "Wow, this is." I founded the New York Hero Society. We have to have an event here, and then COVID came like right after that, and fortunately they are opened again, and at some point when I go back to New York, we'll celebrate there because
Yeah.
there's one place at least in New York City that's celebrating the genius and the achievements here of Bolton
So
and
so
Watt.
do they serve British pub food there, or do they have like American food like burgers and and stuff
No, it's
like that? Do
American
you know?
food. Yeah, yeah. It's a,
Okay.
it's not like that British. It's yeah. It's
Okay.
it's
All right.
it's both
So I
actually.
haven't
Yeah. Hmm.
I haven't been in New York City in a couple of years, and I'm not that far. I gotta go into the
Yeah.
city one day and go have. I'm
Yeah.
sure they have a website. Go, look at their menu,
It is. Yeah.
and can
Hmm.
go down there and have dinner at Bolton and Watts. I mean, you can't you can't beat that, right?
It's
So
amazing. So just continuing on with Watt's life here, 1784. That's he combines all of his inventions, and that's called the Watt engine. Then he gets um, put into the Royal Society, which is like the highest honor you can get for somebody um, at that age. And 1800, the contract with Bolton expires, and he retires. He's in his what 60s, and he's had a good life. He's had a comfortable life, but he's hands over the business to his son. They both give to their sons, and he just continues tinkering. He wants to invent a play, some kind of device to replicate statues, because that's one of the big things that they're doing. Yeah, and just continues on through the rest of his life, and makes it to 1819. Lives a full life, and that's when he dies. They change the unit of measurement to the watt. And I just want to read, Andy, in Westminster Hall, they have this beautiful sculpture of him, and on the monument, it has some things about the king, and it says James Watt, who directed the force of an original genius, early exercised in philosophical researches to the improvement of the steam engine, enlarged the resources of his country, increased the power of man, and rose to an eminence among the most illustrious followers of science and real benefactors of the world. I mean, that's a
wow,
fitting tribute
yeah,
to this
to,
man, and it's there,
right.
Westminster
to the
Abbey.
to the father of the steam engine, the work engine of the Industrial Revolution. And speaking of the
Mhm.
leading scientific and technological talent, we should at least briefly mention that Watt was a charter member an extraordinary organization, known as the Lunar Society of Birmingham.
Lunar
That was like
Society. Yeah.
reads like yeah, Lunar
Yes.
Society of Birmingham reads like a who's who of
Yes.
scientific, technological, and industrial talent of late 18th century Britain. And we should
Hmm.
point out,
Why?
speaking of
Why called? Why were they
yeah,
called, Andy?
why?
Why were
Yeah,
they called? Yeah.
yeah. We should point out why it has that name, because the roads were so primitive that when they met, they had to meet when the moon was when the moon was full. So the
Full
primitive
moon.
roads, so that they could
Yeah.
see where they were going, and not stumble into potholes the size of the size of a wagon or whatever.
Yeah.
That's how primitive conditions were, even in the late 18th century. I'm guessing here that they met all day, and then when they had somebody's house, and then when you had to
Right.
return home at night, they needed the full moon. I don't know if they met.
Hmm.
Did they meet if the weather forecast was cloudy? Did they have weather forecasts back in the late
They were
18th century?
motivated, Andy, because they shared. They were motivated. I think they found a way to get together because it was
Yeah, well,
only it's only
they
once a
did.
month, and it's like I got to
Right,
get this stuff done and share it with my peers by next. And I think
yeah,
they like
right,
go around and
right. Yeah,
present on
they
different
did. Yeah, they did. And
specialties.
look
Yeah,
at look at the members: James Watt, Matthew Bolton, Erasmus Darwin, leading
yeah,
physician of the
grandfather.
day, and
Hmm.
a botanist. Yeah,
Hmm.
grandfather of Charles Darwin. Uh, William Withering, another leading physician of the day, who introduced digitalis into cardiac care, which was a
Yeah,
major innovation in heart treatment. Josiah Wedgwood, the famous manufacturer of pottery. I think the Wedgwood Company is
pottery.
still
Yep. Yes.
in
Yeah.
existence today. Who also figured out how to one means of resolving the ancient problem of measuring temperatures in the kiln. Who was Charles Darwin's
Hmm.
other grandfather, by the way. William
Wow.
Small, who was a professor, formerly a professor at William and Mary College in Virginia,
Mm.
where a certain young American went to college, and studied with him. Guy happened to have the name of Thomas Jefferson.
That's right. Yep.
William Small was Jefferson credited Small for just guiding the course of his life. He was a mentor to Jefferson. Came back across the pond. Was invented different types of clocks. He was
Hmm.
was a science advisor. I think to Watt and Bolton, but has a place in the development of the steam engine, because he was a science advisor to them, and
Hmm.
evidently helpful, and so on, and other illustrious members. But the Lunar Society reached its zenith when Joseph Priestley, moved into
Yeah.
the. And Joseph Priestley is one of the greatest scientists
Episode
of history.
7, you and John covered Joseph Priestley. Yeah. Just
Yeah,
so
Joseph Priestley, one of the
our
greatest
listeners can.
scientists of history, a
Hmm.
chemist who he was the one who isolated oxygen, wasn't he?
Hmm.
As a distinct
He used a
gas,
different
I
name
believe.
for it, but yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Personal friend to Benjamin Franklin, who encouraged him to research electricity, which Priestley did, and wrote, an important book on the topic. I think the title was "The History
Yeah.
of Electricity." So Priestley, one of the great, was a science advisor to his brother-in-law, Iron Mad John Wilkinson. One of the great scientists of the 18th century, or of any era. Watt and Bolton were charter members of this extraordinary group. It's like
Yeah.
going to Galt's Gulch, and you have all of these great
Right.
minds there.
Yeah.
But this
Hmm.
is in real life in Birmingham, England, in the late 18th century, the Lunar Society of Birmingham. So yeah,
Yeah. And
go ahead.
Andy, if I could just say, Galt and John Galt and Atlas Shrugged, he is discovering a new source of power that had been in the earth since its beginning. That's kind of paraphrasing what he says in the novel. And this is where Watt, this is where I place him in that category. Watt is in real life. John Galt is in fiction, but that's the level we're talking about. Harnessing this power that has scared to death humans, since they were around. Because, like I say, I see steam coming out of the ground. Yeah, New York City potholes. That's manholes. That's one thing. That's kind of tamed. But out in nature, you see steam coming out. It's not fun.
Yeah.
And being able to harness that and channel it and turn it around so that it's in the hand of man is
Yep.
that's one of a kind.
Yep. And then one thing we could say for certain as we near our conclusion here is Ben Neely is wrong, right? I mean, if you guys
Oh
readers
yeah,
of Atlas
yeah,
Shrugged, Ben Neely's the
yeah,
contractor Dagny stuck with to build the Jean
yeah.
Galt line after McNamara retires. He tells her, "Muscles, Miss Taggart." I always thought of Popeye when I read that.
Yes,
Muscles, Miss Taggart.
muscles.
That muscles, yeah, muscles, Miss Taggart. That's all it takes to build things in this world. No, Ben Neely, you're wrong. Mind power, is what it takes. Whether it was the harnessing of steam, or the harnessing of electricity, or the
Mhm.
harnessing of nuclear, or the development of internal combustion engines, and so on. And so, power tools, to build
Yeah,
houses and apartment buildings and skyscrapers and stuff. And Watt and Bolton, especially Watt, is an enormous step forward in harnessing the power of steam, like you said, developing the steam engine, and using much
yeah,
more than now muscle power of humans or animals to
right.
produce consumer goods and
Yeah,
and raise the human level of prosperity enormously.
yeah. So someone gave a eulogy for Watt at his funeral. And by the way, he did not want any acclamation afterwards, but his son went against his wishes and had statues built all over the place for him. But here's what one of the people said in his eulogy about Watt. He subdued and regulated the most terrific, powerful power in the universe, the power which, by the joint operation of pressure and heat, probably produces those tremendous convulsions of the earth, which in a moment subvert whole cities and almost change the face of an inhabited globe. This apparently ungovernable power Mr. Watt reduced to the state of such perfect organization and discipline that it may now be safely maneuvered and brought into irresistible action, irresistible but still regulated, measured, and ascertained, or lulled into the most complete and secure response at the will of man and under the guidance of his feeble hand. I mean, that is that is like a monument to the human mind and what somebody can do with this persistence, and again with the funding, with the backing of a businessman who can bring this to a wider audience. So he's not working on
No,
his own.
absolutely. Let me read something too in
Yeah.
conclusion.
Mhm.
This is this is
Go
this
ahead.
is about Priestley and the Lunar Society, but it applies as much
Mhm.
to Watt and Bolton because this is archetypal of the Enlightenment and the British Industrial Revolution,
Yeah.
to which it gave rise. So, in the Capitalist Manifesto, the relationship between this is what page 92. The relationship between the great scientist Priestley, the father of pneumatic chemistry, and the industrialist inventors composing the rest of the Lunar Society was a microcosm of the Enlightenment's ideal of the close working relationship between theoretical reason and the progressive forces of inventiveness and industrialization. Priestley
Mhm.
was no pure scientist to be horrified with a suggestion that his work be turned to use. The mixing of science, applied science, and technology in lunar activities found a supporter in Priestley, and as an industrial research organization, the Lunar Society found in him also a paid consultant. Now, this is as
Nice.
characteristic of Watt and Bolton as it is of
Mhm.
Priestley and the other great thinkers of the Lunar Society and of the Enlightenment in general. The
Yeah.
essence the essence of the Enlightenment is to make theoretical advances in the sciences and or in other fields, and then use those advances in theoretical knowledge to invent practical devices and industries to vastly improve human life on Earth. And that's exactly
Yeah.
what Watt and Bolton did. You think of these guys,
Mhm.
Robert, and all the fans of Atlas Shrugged, Watt and Bolton, Priestley. These are the anti-Robert Stadlers. Stadler was
Right.
the pure scientist who was horrified at the
The
thought that,
theory.
again,
Yep.
yeah,
Hmm.
pure theory,
Hmm.
doesn't want to apply it in practice. He sees the remnants of Galt's mode and he's all excited. Do you realize the advances in theoretical physics and energy conversion he had to make? And then he thinks,
Hmm.
well, if he did all that, why is he playing around with some, this elaborate piece of plumbing or something? And why is he, and Dagny
He
responds,
likes living on Earth. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
maybe he wants to live on Earth, Dr. Stadler. Well, these Enlightenment
Exactly. Yeah.
guys, they wanted to live on Earth. Remember the poverty we were talking about?
Yeah.
They wanted to live on Earth. They wanted to improve life on Earth. And they were determined to use advances in theoretical knowledge to make practical improvements. One great example of the Enlightenment spirit across the pond was Benjamin Franklin, who made advances in the study of electricity, linked lightning to electricity, but was chagrined that he had not yet put that to any practical use. And then he invented the lightning rod, and he was happy. He used the theoretical knowledge to develop practical means to improve human life on Earth. That's the essence of the Enlightenment. That's what makes it
Amazing.
so great. Yeah, that's what makes it so great. And James, nobody typifies that more beautifully than does our hero for today, James Watt, the perfecter of
Yes.
the steam engine, the work engine of the Industrial Revolution. And so
Hmm.
I think we could salute the great man, Robert. And
Yeah.
these other great heroes say thank you very much. We
Thank
like you
you.
said before. Yeah, we have you said before we have tremendous gratitude for these guys because we live in a world where there's all these advances. We're not living back then, in the grinding poverty that permeated, the entire world, including the West. And it's because of men like this, Watt, Bolton, and the other great heroes of the Lunar Society is because of men like that we've made so many advances and our living standards and our life expectancy is so much more advanced. So, like
Hmm.
Dagny meeting these guys in heaven, say thank you, and well done,
That's
right?
right.
Well done. Uh,
Well done, James Watt.
yeah, well done, James Watt. Absolutely right. And so I want to wish you, Robin, and everybody else out there in Hero Land. Let's try to
You too.
lead heroic lives, have a heroic day, strive to be, the best version of ourselves, like these heroes show us is possible. And we will be back next week once again on the Hero Show. Take care, everybody.